Greetings, 8th graders. We are going to be talking about Australia and Oceania today. So let's jump right in. And you can see here on this map, Australia and Oceania. So Oceania is exactly what it sounds like. It is a region of the world that is composed of mostly ocean, but you can also see that mostly ocean is dotted with tens of thousands of little islands, and we are going to talk about that today as well, along with the continent of Australia, which is a very interesting continent or subcontinent uh, full of the most venomous and deadly creatures on the planet. So, basic overview of the key physical features of Oceania. Oceania is a grouping of thousands of islands in the Pacific. And there are three types of islands in this region. There are high islands, which are formed by underwater volcanoes. They have fresh water and fertile soil, right? There are also low islands and atolls. These are formed by coral, and they have no fresh water and very little soil, right? And then there are continental islands, and they are formed by the movement of tectonic plates, and they have a varied landscape, fresh water, and fertile soil, and they're much bigger, right? So high islands would be volcanoes that are sticking up. You can see that right down there in the middle. Low islands and atolls. And actually, if you look over here, this is an atoll on the bottom left. And those are very cool. We're going to talk about those. Just really, really interesting. And they don't generally have a lot of fresh water, and they don't generally have a lot of soil. And that makes some sense, right? If you look at that thing, it probably doesn't have a lot of soil, right? And then continental islands. These are formed by the movement of tectonic plates. They're going to be much bigger. So, the Pacific realm of Oceania is divided into three regions. You have Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia, and we'll talk about those. Melanesia is West Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Fiji. Micronesia would be Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, Northern Mariana Islands, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, Nauru, Kiribati, Guam, and then Polynesia would have the Hawaiian Islands. Yes, that's right. Samoa, American Samoa, Tuvalu, Tonga, Eastern Kiribati, the Cook Islands, and French Polynesia. And I know this. Looking at this probably doesn't make a lot of sense, so let's just take a look at a map. And there you can see Melanesia, which has New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu and Fiji. Is all right here. Melanesia is close to Australia. Then you have Micronesia, which is north of that, and they have Guam, the Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, right? You can see that there. And then last but not least, we have Polynesia, right? And Polynesia controls it contains not just New Zealand, but also a whole bunch of other pieces as well. And at its northern point, you can see Hawaii is there as well. So those are those three regions of Oceania. And I'll probably ask you in a quiz which one Hawaii is in. Oh yeah, which one is Hawaii in? Next up is the creation of an atoll, and this is where things get really cool. So we talked about high islands, and you can see up here in the first stage, you have a high island, right? It's an underwater volcano. This creates an oceanic island where the water is shallow enough to receive sunlight, right? Right up here on the edges. Corals form, coral reefs form. And they form around the island. And this is what it ends up looking like. You have this sort of high point in the middle from up on top, and then you have these corals formed around the outside. But as time wears on, right, that volcano is going to be eroded away. And as the volcano sinks beneath the sea, the coral reef is able to grow fast enough to keep in touch with the shallow sunlit waters. So that coral reef keeps growing, right, as that mountain sinks. And eventually, that mountain sinks all the way out of sight due to erosion and other things, and you end up with just this coral reef encircling a large shallow lagoon and creating impressive walls on the seaward side, right, of coral growth. And so where do you have these things? These are going to grow wherever you have volcanoes. So where do we have volcanoes in the Pacific? Well, they are located along the Ring of Fire. And the Ring of Fire is a ring around the outside of the Pacific Ocean. And that Ring of Fire right, is a place where volcanoes pop up, and you can see there's strings of these islands, right, all along the outside. These are active tectonic plates. There are a lot of earthquakes in California, of course, because of the Ring of Fire. Uh, and there are some trenches that are involved in this as well, and you can see those here. Uh, but yeah, this is the Ring of Fire. So the Ring of Fire circles the Pacific Ocean, and it has a lot of volcanoes. So let's talk about the climate zones, right? You have a lot of tropical monsoon climate up here on the northern parts of those islands, right? And that is because this wet wind is coming down here from the northern Pacific Ocean. Um, and if you look at Australia, you'll notice much of Australia is actually desert and steppe. So this would be dry grassland and desert for the most part. Now they do have over here, and if you look at New Zealand over here as well, you'll notice that the very eastern side of Australia has sort of a temperate climate, right? So it's pretty wet all year round. Same thing in New Zealand over here as well. And Australia has a really year-round monsoon cycle season, right? So the winds are coming from the north west in from basically the end of October, or sorry, from the end of September, so the beginning of October. So from fall to spring till April 30th, right? From fall into spring, you have those winds coming from the northwest, and then from spring to fall, those winds are going to be going uh, are going to be going from Australia from south to east, right? So you'll have a wet season where you have more rain coming in off the ocean, and then you'll have a dry season where it'll be wetter down here. And so you'll notice, right, that if you look at this, right, the darker green it is, the more rain you're getting. But for 6 months, you get a lot of rain up here, and then for 6 months, you don't get very much at all. And you'll notice right here in the middle, that desert area hardly ever gets any rain, whether it's in the wet season from the north or the wet season from the south. And you can see that here, right? If we look at vegetation, desert is in sort of pink, and it's right there in the middle. That's heavy desert. You also have some grasslands and you have some savanna, but for the most part, Australia is a very dry continent. You do end up with some humid middle latitude forest. If you're looking down here, you can see that. And there's some equatorial rainforest. Very little rainforest, but there is some in Australia right up there, closest to that northern tip, that northeastern tip of Australia. So Australia mostly dry. And here you can see a breakdown. There's the Australian Shield, is that area right there. The pink is the continental shelf, and interestingly enough, over here is something called the Great Barrier Reef, which you can see in blue. And so that is the largest coral reef. It's actually the largest living thing on the planet. And you can see there's some salt lakes in the middle of Australia here, perennial rivers, which keep going. And yeah. And here you can see another map of Australia. And there's a lot of different things you can get looking at different maps. And here you can see, again, the Great Barrier Reef. This is a different way to look at it up here on the right. And we're going to talk about that. Let's talk about that. And here's a map. Take some time to look at this one, talking about fisheries and which areas are being overfished. But let's talk about that Great Barrier Reef, because that's the one. That's the thing I'd like to talk about today with you at the end. This is the last thing we're going to cover before I let you go and go take that quiz. So we got some facts. The Great Barrier Reef is the largest coral reef in the world. It's 12,500 miles long, and it's off the eastern coast of Queensland, right? That's northeastern Australia, and it's the only living thing that you can actually see from space. It is home to 400 plus species of coral and 1,500 plus species of fish. And here's some cool pictures of that if you like. We're going to ask you a question here too. And there you can see, this is the map of where you can find the Great Barrier Reef, right? Just off of Queensland, northeastern Australia. Uh, and that should cover it for us today. If you have any questions, feel free to find me. I will post this in your Google Classroom as well as slides. So if you'd like to go through that, you can. Good luck with the quiz. If you have any questions, again, right, feel free to contact me in email, or you can come to the Google Classroom, Google Hangouts, and or the Google Meet for my office hours, and I'm happy to meet up with you there. So thanks a bunch, eighth graders. Feel free to talk to me whenever you need to.